Today's video is honestly going to be a mishmash of minor updates related to my Toyota Tacoma suspension that, despite being small, actually have made a big difference. I want to show you my new rear bump stops in action, and I get it, honestly, how interesting can bump stops be? But for a while, I couldn't dial in the ride quality in the rear of my truck, and these helped out a lot. So for those of you out there who have maybe experienced similar symptoms to me, like decreased ride quality in the rear back there over time, or you've installed a camper system or bed rack and you carry a lot of weight, or deck system like me, maybe the things I did to my Tacoma's rear suspension could translate to working on your Tacoma as well. And then also in this video, I'm going to be showing you a new bracket I need to install because I broke one of my compressor adjuster knobs on my front shock reservoir and I can't adjust it for the time being. And the reason I broke it was my sway bar, and I'll show you that in a little bit more detail in this video. But speaking of the sway bar, I considered deleting mine, but the amount of body roll I experienced going around turns and loss of on-road comfort just honestly didn't make it worth it for me. But I'm curious to know what you guys think. I get a lot of mixed answers from people who have removed their sway bar. Obviously, this is for better articulation off-road, like out here in the desert. But anyways, let me take you back to my garage so I can show you the setup a little bit better. Okay, so back here in the rear of my Tacoma, for those of you who are new to the channel or haven't followed my suspension journey, basically I have about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches of lift over how these trucks come from the factory. And that is from this leaf pack from Deaver. This is their N98 leaf pack. It's kind of unlike the stock leaf springs in the sense that it's comprised, as you can see, of more leaves, which make it have a more progressive spring rate. You might have also caught that it doesn't have the overload leaf that you see on the stock spring, so it's not meant for towing or anything, which is what I don't use my truck for anyways. But anyways, enough about the leaf pack. The bump stops I have back here are pretty cool too. These bump stops are from AccuTune Off-Road, and if you don't know what a bump stop is for, one, it's to prevent bottom outs that can damage your shocks, and two, if you do hit a big bump and do bottom out, you want something comfortable. There we go, there's a bottom out. The Deaver leaf springs you just saw and my Fox shocks certainly helped me achieve the height and ride quality I was looking for, but I'd say the upgraded bump stops also play a big role in the rear suspension as well. So for years, I was bottoming out the rear end of my truck super soon, and it was because of all the weight I carry back here, like my deck drawer system, but more so all the tools and things I put inside of it. In the back of my truck here, I keep tools, compressor accessories, and probably the biggest weight offender of them all, my Pro Eagle off-road jack. All of this weight contributed to not only the rear end of my truck sagging on the stock leaf springs, but also a harsh feeling bottom out with the stock bump stops, which are a hard piece of rubber. But my AccuTune ones are a little bit different. I can actually pull this off for you guys. So if you look really closely, you can see that there's these little holes. This is actually foam. You know, I'm not strong enough to squeeze this thing between my fingers, but this thing will compress. What I'm learning is that you can actually get a nice controlled bottom out from something that just isn't super stiff. Now, because they're made of foam, I feel like the bump stops, as they compress, kind of act like a mechanical spring in the sense as they compress more, you get more resistance. And overall, I just feel more support with these bump stops. They're comfortable both on and off-road. You know, if you have an aftermarket suspension package in the rear of your truck and the factory bump stops aren't doing the job carrying weight or just feel harsh, check these out for sure. I myself am impressed. If you do the AccuTune Kit 2, which I've had for a while, but with their older version of bump stops, it's one of the few kits that sells a different size bump stop cup so that you can get the correct height adjustment. So sorry it's a little difficult to see back here, but right about there you could see that is the cup I'm talking about that the bump stop sits in. This height is important because you don't want your rear shocks to bottom out too early. And then for a while too, you could see down here that I actually have the flipped U-bolts. This is nice because when they're flipped, you get much more clearance here on the axle. And side note, a little while ago when I toured the all-new 2024 Toyota Tacoma, on that truck I saw in the rear what I thought to be a foam bump stop. I mean, that suspension is completely different than how this one is designed. It's now a rear link suspension, but I just thought it was interesting to see a foam bump stop on a Tacoma from the factory. So all this to say, I am now a big believer in telling people when they ask me about my suspension or what upgrades they should do to also look into bump stops. Just consider them. Don't just overlook them. I would say that after going through this experience myself. Obviously, I am not a suspension expert, but what I'm slowly learning, and may be obvious to other people, but as I'm going through this, all these suspension components work together. Changing your springs and shocks changes the ride quality characteristics, but so do the bump stops too. They play a bigger role than you may initially think. And I can really only do my best here in this video to show you guys visually as much as I can and just explain with words with how much of a change this is. But I just hope this helps paint a picture. Alright, in the next part of this video, as I mentioned earlier, we need to replace some brackets that will solve a problem with my compression adjuster knobs on my Fox Shocks reservoirs. Okay, the other thing I need to fix today is where these resis mount for my front shocks with a brand new bracket, because I have had this issue where this compression knob, it's an adjustment you can make on these Fox shocks. Normally you've got your low speed compression knob here and high speed compression knob on the outside here. I can adjust the high speed one, turn it just fine, but can't do the same with the low speed compression knob. It is broken. What basically happened is the inner shaft broke. If you can see, there's some scuff coming through over there. And then there's also some chipped paint where my sway bar is. You can kind of imagine what happened. I hit a big bump in the desert, the sway bar came up, bent the adjuster knob, now it's stuck. And I will eventually have to get this fixed, but we want to prevent that problem from happening. And even if you try adjusting and moving these as high as you can, the sway bar can still make contact. So AccuTune, who's funny enough, we just talked about their bump stops, they make these brackets that is going to kind of relocate where this resi mounts. It's going to mount more like this now. And the knob is no longer going to be in the sway bar's trajectory. Thankfully, this was a simple 15-minute process. Just disconnect the sway bar, remove the old bracket, and put the new bracket in. Now, I don't know how many others have this issue as well. It is pretty specific, but hopefully it helps someone out there. And I feel like I already know what you guys are gonna ask. Why don't I just remove the sway bar completely? Well, I have actually removed this before off my truck, and I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I daily this truck more so than when I off-road with it. And I wanna enjoy it while I'm on-road, as well as still unlocking its capabilities off-road. Like, to an extent, I mean, I know this thing isn't like a Baja truck or anything, but I can still have a lot of fun with it on the dirt. And I'm not naive to the fact that completely removing the sway bar would just get rid of this inherent problem I'm having in the first place. But that's very specific, and I would say the bigger reason that most people will remove their sway bar is obviously going to be to help with articulation off-road. However, again, I have taken this off and driven with it off on-road, and honestly, it was just way too extreme for me. The body roll was way too much when I was going around bends. It felt really scary driving my truck. It was like quite a night and day difference without the sway bar, but like in a negative way on road for me. Some people will say if you have stiffer shocks over OEM, like say these ones over here, I guess they would be considered like a stiffer ride. It will kind of like cancel out, but I'll say for me, that was not the case. I did not like driving this truck without a sway bar on road for a second. It was just too scary for me. That is the truth. As soon as I got home, I put the sway bar back on, and that's where it has stayed. By the way, here's the new bracket versus the old. Very, very similar. It just changes the angle a little bit. And you'll see it's gonna be a little bit closer to the upper control arm. But thankfully, my upper control arms do still clear this, so we're all good. But yeah, just like for me, the off-road benefits just don't outweigh the safety aspect of having it on, since again, I do drive this truck mostly on road. But that's just my personal preference. Obviously, my truck isn't set up the same way everyone else's truck is. I'm not advocating for either way, just sharing my own personal experience. I'm trying a slightly different method today with putting the reservoir on the bracket first and then putting the bracket up. I don't know if it was a good idea. Whenever I have to adjust these little things, they're super, super annoying. So all the room and clearance I can get is good. Anyways, I'm curious to know what you guys have for your setup. Do you have the sway bar still? Did you delete it? I'm sure there's going to be many mixed responses, but going back to the 2024 Tacoma I toured, I was actually very, very happy to see sway bar disconnects on that truck, which I wish there was a good option. If anyone knows a good option for adding like quick disconnects for this sway bar, I guess that would kind of solve the problem I'm talking about. Okay, I feel like putting the reservoir on the bracket first made it a little bit easier. I don't know, but regardless, this bracket was not too bad to install anyways. So now you can see the shock is located a little bit closer to the upper control arm, but even if we cycle the upper control arm all the way up, there is still plenty of clearance. And now we shouldn't have the issue with the sway bar hitting this knob. So those were a bunch of updates related to my Toyota Tacoma suspension that I've installed lately. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to connect more with me, you can follow me on my Instagram. It is at ChloeKuo Taco. I post more in real time on there. Other than that, I hope I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.